Hey folks, Dust here, and I want to discuss a little bit more about DreamHack Masters Stockholm. And what I mean by that is while I already did a big preview video that talked about all the teams that will be at DreamHack Masters Stockholm, which you can check out, I'll put a link in the description below. There were 4 teams from DreamHack Masters Stockholm that just competed at the Zotac Masters event, and those teams, of course, were Tyloo, OpTic, Ghost, and Made in Brazil. And so I kind of want to talk about from what we saw at Zotac Masters, what it might mean for them going into Stockholm. So I guess an addendum to the preview video that I did not so long ago. And I'll try to keep this short and just talk a little bit about each of these teams and, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly, so to speak. And we'll start with some of the bad, which Tyloo will be the first one we'll talk about, which is a team that has to be frustrating if you're a fan of, because they do some really cool things and then they do some things that make you feel like all the hopes you worked up in them were all for naught, that it's never really going to pan out in the end. And what I mean by this is they started the year out really rough, you know, at Starlighter Season 4 in Katowice. Then they won that Chongqing Invitational, granted against a lot of smaller teams from the CIS region and a couple of other Asian teams. And then they went to that Asia Summit event and lost out the Greyhound. So immediately whatever hope you had from the Chongqing Invitational kind of got, you know, wiped away. And then they flopped at Marseille, so kind of continuing this downward trajectory. But then they had a couple of really cool events, which was that key invitational that they came second at, where they wound up losing to what is now Red Reserve and formerly Godsent, but they, you know, are at least beating AGO and Big and some other teams. Then that top 4 at Sydney was really what was impressive, right? Took a map off of FaZe, beat Renegades, which has given them problems in recent memory. And then they beat Cloud9 as well, so they weren't taking top 4 at the event. And then at the Asia Minor, they took care of business. Again, same top 2 as always, alongside Renegades to qualify for the major, so that doesn't really change anything. But then at Shanghai, things looked off again. Because, yeah, they beat VP and Boot Dreamscape to make the finals, but they looked piss poor against Energy. Like, just didn't look like anything. And then they go into this event and they get, you know, a 1-2 loss to Kingland. Now, granted, one of the losses was a 14-16 loss on Overpass, but what made this one really killer was the fact that they were actually up 10-5 after the first half from their T side. So they got the hard part done at Overpass, and then they just, you know, weren't able to do anything in the second half on their CT side. And then on Train, they just got blasted. Like, they didn't really look like anything in that game. Very reminiscent of how they looked against Energy over at Shanghai. And so it's just like, you know, what's going on with this team? I mean, they have talent, particularly in Bintet and Excurate, and I think somebody's also, you know, a pretty solid rifler. It's not like DD and Mo or compete boat anchors or anything. They usually contribute pretty well. So, I mean, again, this is just a team that becomes really difficult to read right when you start to, you know, believe and become impressed by some of the talent of their players, or maybe just the fact that they've evolved a lot strategically. You know, they're still a very aggressive team, but it's not like they're just relying on gimmicks anymore. Like, they actually can play defaults a lot better. They can do a little bit more stuff in the mid-round that they weren't really capable of before, where they used to just be, you know, depending on like these really crazy early round executions. So it's great in that regard, but then the results just don't happen that you expect. You know, the ones that you would hope for from this team, that they truly are going to take that next step and become like a real contender. You know, right now it just feels like they're forever destined to be nothing better than like top 20 or something. And so that's really the takeaways from this event is I came away from this event not learning anything new about Tyloo, still being, you know, worried on what kind of team they really are, because I feel like they're really hit or miss. And I think ultimately in my preview video, I did pick Tyloo to advance. Now I feel like I can't do that anymore. I feel like after watching Zotac Masters, I think North probably will just go ahead and take the 2nd seed, and Tyloo will have another group stage elimination, as they often do in big international tournaments. You know, they didn't inspire any confidence, I guess is the point. And so we'll leave it at that. Then we'll go to something that was even far worse coming out of Zotac Masters, which was the OpTic debacle. And this is a team that started off fine. I mean, their debut at EPL was you know, good enough, you know, beating NIP and Space Soldiers in best of 3s, eliminated by what is now Made in Brazil. Respectable. DreamHack Austin, though, was a pretty big shit-the-bed moment for this team. You know, losing to Rogue in a best of 1, then losing to Space Soldiers in a best of 3, though at least Space Soldiers did wind up winning the event, so they were actually playing really well that tournament. So when you add that context, it kind of, you know, makes it a little bit less harsh, but still, after what we saw at EPL, this was certainly disappointing. They didn't qualify for Cologne, which is quite disappointing. Summer was a little bit better. They actually made the finals. They beat North in the best of 3 in the semis. They did fine in the groups. They lose to Imperial in the finals, where Esperanto was just kind of on fire. And it felt like they just kind of let off the gas pedal after they beat North, which is a series they seem to really care about in that tournament. And then they did fine at the minor. Like they came second to NIP. They had beat NIP early in the tournament when it mattered most to actually qualify for the major. And they had some wins against like Int and 3D Max, which again aren't like cream of the crop teams. I think people were looking, for more from this team. I mean, their lineup on paper is insane. I talked about it in the preview video. Like the talent that's there, this team really should be certainly a top 10 team in the world with the lineup they have on paper, and should be a team that you could expect to regularly make it out of groups and even make semifinals appearances. I don't think they're quite at a level where they should be making a lot of finals, but I feel like it's not out of the world of possibility that this team is quality enough, like individually, for each player, man for man, to at least make playoffs every time, and like I said, maybe even get some top 4 finishes. But then they go to this event and just absolutely just a dumpster fire at this tournament. Wound up losing their opening series to Ghost 1-2. They lose the opening game, only getting 3 rounds in the first half on their T side on Nuke. Fair enough. It is, still a pretty CT-sided map, but still this is a little bit crazy, especially given how comfortable Danish teams have typically been on Nuke. Even OpTic is included in that. I think they've often liked to play it, so this was pretty poor showing. They made a little bit of a comeback in the second half, but nothing of note. They win Overpass convincingly. Okay, fair enough. And then they lose the third map on Inferno. They only get 2 rounds on the CT side in the first half of this game against Ghost. And we're going to talk about Ghost in a second, and I definitely want to give them their proper credit for playing well in this series, and even playing well in the series they ultimately lost to King One in the semifinals. But this is absolutely fucking embarrassing for OpTic Gaming. Like, what in the hell is this at this point? It's gotten to a point now where I feel like if OpTic don't perform well at Stockholm, unless the major bails them out, like if they do well at the major, they need one of those 2 tournaments to go really right for them. Like, they need to, bare minimum, I feel like, make legendary status at the major, get like top 8 somehow, or they need to like make at least semifinals of Stockholm or something like that. Otherwise, they're just going to continue to be seen as fairly mediocre. And then you have to kind of wonder if a post-major shuffle starts to happen for this team. I know it's really early. They haven't played a lot of LAN events. I mean, if we're being honest here, they've only played, 5 LAN events now? This was their 5th LAN. And so we haven't seen them at a lot of big events yet. But, I mean, come on. Like, when you're struggling at DreamHack Austin against teams like Rogue and Space Soldiers, you're struggling at this event to a team like Ghost. Like, this is just unacceptable for, the talent that they're supposed to have. But where they finished here, this is pretty embarrassing. I think you have to start really getting concerned for this team now going forward, because the results just have not been there. So let's talk about the flip side of that whole Ghost and OpTic matchup, the Ghost side of things, the NA team with, of course, a little bit of a sprinkle of European flavor, with Crystal now coming in for Poland. Coming into this event, this team had certainly been interesting in the NA scene, even going back to when they were called Torque, just because they were doing really well online to qualify for events like Belo Horizonte, like qualifying for this Stockholm event coming up, like qualifying for this Zotac Masters event that we're talking about now. Definitely getting the job done in that regard. They also just look like a well-drilled and coordinated team, and of course a lot of credit given to Steel for that, kind of known for being kind of that stricter type of caller, a guy who likes structure, who likes to really think about the game and come up with cool stuff and think about the coordinated executes with the utility time just perfectly, and kind of being that team that is going to be fearless, run in together with good nades and look to play good CS. I mean, obviously they can have poor tournaments and look sloppy like anyone can, but the focus has always been to have like a pretty well-drilled team, and they certainly have done really well, kind of exceeding expectations, I think, for a lot of people, given the restriction that they have on Steel with the major, and then therefore that's going to maybe make it harder for them to find talented players who want to play on the team. But they've been making do with what they have, and some of these players have actually started to really look sharp. At this event, we already talked about the OpTic matchup, so I'm not going to stress onto that too much. Basically just flip what I said about OpTic and then think about the good that Ghost did to be able to, do really well on Nuke, and then on that third map on the front just kind of crushed them from their CT side. Then they go up against Kingwin. They lose the opening map 14-16 on Mirage, very close halves. So, I mean, a loss, sure, but a respectable game played by Ghost. They look, on par with Kingwin. It was a very close game. They wound up winning Nuke pretty convincingly. and then they lose the game on overpass. Solid T side to open, but only get one round on the CT side in the second half. And overpass CT side seems to be this team's kryptonite in this tournament. The same thing happened to them against OpTic, where they couldn't get the job done on CT side overpass as well as you hope they could have. And it happens again here against Kingwon. So that's like a problem area to probably look at for this team, is maybe looking at that CT side on overpass. But just some key takeaways from the event, you know, while they do get eliminated in the semifinals by Kingwon, is Wardell and Kusto played really well at this tournament. And to be honest with you, Wardell has been really solid for this team for quite some time, actually. He's done well in almost every event he's played for this team outside of the most recent Starlighter qualifiers and like ESL 1 Belo Horizonte. You can pretty much say the same for Kusta as well. The only difference being is I think that Wardell is generally more impactful than Kusta is. And I think Kusta is more prone to have an off game than Wardell is, at least currently. Like, it seems like Kusta has like maybe one bad map a series. Like, if you have the best of you that goes all three maps, he plays good in two, off in one, and that doesn't seem to happen nearly as much for someone like Wardell, who seems to be a little bit more consistent. But again, both these players have been playing pretty well, and I think Wardell, as an AVP, obviously that gun can have a lot of impact, and so if Wardell's on fire, then he really opens up a lot of options for this team, and so definitely want to give shout out to those two players. Also still continues to lead this team really well. They still look super coordinated. While they do have roles established, no one is afraid to run in first. A lot of the time it seems like it's Steel actually being the one to lead by example, willing to be fearless and try to go for entry frags. Sub-Rose is probably the other big one to kind of help with that. But I've certainly seen times where Kusta will go in first or be a second, you know, entry if it makes sense based on spawn timings and just where they happen to be at when something happens that they need to react to. And so I think that's great. I do wonder, you know, if Crystal really is the right fit for this team. I know that he's on trial. They're going to play with him for a couple of events and then kind of make a decision when they want to keep him full term or maybe trial other players. I just don't know what he adds, at least what I can see. Like, maybe he adds something that I can't know, like being a secondary caller, maybe giving ideas to Steel to help lead the team. His communication could be great. He certainly can just do his job being a support player, so maybe you don't need a lot of production from him fragging-wise. But I feel like if that's going to be the case, maybe Sub-Rose is going to have to produce more, or maybe you need like a stronger secondary entry fragger with Steel to add that fragging power next to Wardell and Kusta to make sure there's enough frag production for this team to actually be really competitive. Because I mean, it's all fine and dandy that you're qualifying for big events and you're doing some cool stuff online in the NA region, but if this team ever wants to get like seriously up there on the totem pole, if they really want, you know, people to really start taking notice, like a team that could actually, in theory, like be a top 15 team or something in the world, then I feel like something's going to have to give a little bit there in the fragging department, whether it's finding a different fifth than Crystal that can help frag, or whether it's keeping Crystal as a support player and then finding like a better secondary entry instead of Sub-Rosa. I think either one's a good option. Not saying they have to do it now. For all we know, they could do really well at Stockholm. It was Crystal's first event with the team, so you can't judge them too harshly yet. I'm just trying to think about long term, you know, what kind of lot they would have to be like someone to be taken seriously in international Counter-Strike. But I will say Steel does frag pretty well for an in-game leader. You know, he doesn't necessarily have huge numbers. He's really only had like one off event though at Belo Horizonte, and I've seen him have some big games. And again, he plays a hard role, having to lead as well as maybe even entry a bit. So he's definitely does it a lot better than other in-game leaders do in the scene. So got to give your, you know, tip your hat to him, so to speak. And that's kind of that. But now we're going to get into the real meat and potatoes, I guess. You know, the big victory in all of this, which is Made in Brazil, who won the tournament with no trouble. I mean, they blasted Flash 2-0, only allowed 4 rounds between those two maps. They 2-0'd MVPPK as well. Again, pretty one-sided games. Not a little bit better, obviously, than what Flash did, but didn't seem to have any trouble. And then against King on the finals day 3-0 the series, only one of the maps was close. That was Cash, which was 16-14 with close sides for each team. But the other two maps were huge on Dust 2 and Train. You know, King didn't even look competitive in those games. So basically, MIBR goes here. They play a total of 7 maps, and really only 1 to 2 of the 7 maps were even close games that MIBR had to break a sweat. I think the biggest thing about it was they seem to have hot starts every game. There was a couple of times where it's not like they like started out 7-0 every time. Like there was maybe a grind a couple of games where it's like 3-3, but then they pulled ahead. Point is, they never really had the grind back a win. Like they were never super behind and had to fight their way back into the game. They usually got double-digit rounds in the first halves of the games they played, and a lot of these games are actually them starting on the terrorist side. So just kind of a couple of things to quickly note. Still don't know what their grind factor is like, if they can bring games back. And again, the level of competition here certainly wasn't as high as what it will be at Stockholm, so it's hard to draw too many conclusions. But at the very least, we can say that Fallen looked really sharp here, returned to form. He won the MVP. He looked so good. I think this is what this team really needed, was him back in form, because he could be so helpful to them with the AWP in the past when they were successful. Maybe he was never like the star of the team. That was always kind of like Coldzera or Fur, like the big names you really look to. But his opping still could have a lot of impact. And so to see that kind of back in action, I think was really important for this team. And to kind of just tack on, everyone played well at this event. Like, Fur was the only one who had a little bit of trouble. He'd have like maybe one bad map per series. But Fallen, Stewie, and Coldzera had some monster numbers, and Tarek was not too far behind. And I think that this is probably going to make people feel a little bit better about the whole Cold situation, because we certainly did see his numbers kind of, you know, fall off a bit just like Fallen. So to see him back in action alongside Fallen, having those two pieces kind of, you know, firing on all cylinders again, even if the level of competition isn't as much, it's still nice to kind of see them show us a little bit of form. And I also will just say, kind of watching the team play, you know, in their cash games, they had Stewie 2K kind of taking a little bit of a back seat sometimes, just kind of playing, you know, at the door, just kind of being a nuisance. And they're really relying, you know, on Fur still being an entry, and Tarek kind of slotting in as that second entry. Also, Fallen on T sides was not really a prominent feature a lot of the time. He was actually the one kind of throwing a lot of the nades to set up, you know, Fur and Tarek. Or even if they went for like a faster explosive execute, where they would actually maybe take Stewie away from the edge and like put him with Tarek and Fur to like rush into a site and trade frag, Fallen was kind of the one that was kind of sitting back and throwing the nades. So his op really wasn't a factor in like going for picks or opening up bomb sites. He was more of kind of support on T side a lot of the time, and Cold also obviously kind of doing something similar that he's always done on a map like Cash. But they showed some versatility in being able to play slow, defaults, map control, play, going for mid control, and also threw in some faster pace executes after kind of setting the tone, playing a little bit more slowly. They would throw some stuff that made you think they were still just going for default mid control, then they hit you really fast somewhere else. So kind of showing that ability to change the pace was certainly good. And certainly on Dust 2, it was kind of a similar story, like able to play the standard Dust 2 meta, essentially. I think one of the best things about this team is they can play really spawn-based, because they have so many players who can just entry, as well as can op. Like, there was plenty of times an op would get past to Tarek, even on Cash, because he had a really good mid-spawn, or similarly on Dust 2, if he had like a really good spawn to go for something, he'd just go for it. And again, similarly, it felt like Fallen took a back seat and threw flashes for people like Tarek or for or whomever to go for an entry, and then he'd kind of follow up with the op. The difference being is on CT sides, Fallen op was a little bit more prominent. Like, that's where he would kind of go for picks and be set up and be featured a little bit more as being an aggressive force, was on that defense. And I think that's actually really nice, because you want an active, mobile, dynamic opper to be successful on CT sides. Just ask anybody who watches Astralis play. That's actually a big feature for them with Device. I think Fallen can kind of serve a similar purpose for this team on CT sides, and that's really good. And again, Stewie 2K, if he has a good spawn, he will just entry frag with Fur, and then that means Tarek kind of slides into a peripheral slot. So they have that interchangeability, and then they're super dangerous if they want to go for a fast-paced execute, because they have plenty of entry fraggers. It's kind of similar to the OpTic team that Tarek is obviously familiar with, that we saw in late 2016, who could do this very thing with like Rush, Tarek, and Mixwell being an entry force. They can do those types of executes with this lineup. So it was at least nice to see some players in form and take care of business, even if it was against lesser competition. But anyway, I just kind of want to talk about these teams that are going to be going to Stockholm that played at Zotac Masters. For me, I think Tyloo's stock went down, and so I think North actually will probably take second seed instead of Tyloo. So I think that kind of changes my prediction a little bit for Group A. I think I was expecting OpTic to maybe give Fnatic a little bit of a run for their money, but now I think their stock has also plummeted big time, and I think Fnatic's just a clear second seed favorite to come out of that group, rather than OpTic really being able to pose any threat. Then, you know, looking at a team like Ghost, I still don't think they've increased their stock enough for me to feel like they actually will take second seed. They have to play Na'Vi first in that group. I think they ultimately lose that. You know, I think Na'Vi shouldn't have too much trouble there. But, you know, whether they can give Energy a run for their money or not, I don't know. Domestic matchups can be fun, sure, but I still don't think enough from Ghost happened for me to call the upset over like an Energy or an NIP to come out second in their group. And then finally, Made in Brazil. I had already predicted them to come out of groups under Mouse Sports. I thought Hellraisers might get them a little bit of run for their money, but there's two problems here. One, OpTic may not wind up going to Stockholm, apparently. As I record this video, that has not been situated. A big statement kind of came out for him where they're kind of still fighting for it, and it still could happen. If it does not happen, there is no chance Hellraisers beat MIBR. MIBR clearly will come out of the group. If OpTic can attend the event, I think they're still dangerous against MIBR in a best-of-1 situation, and they do play each other in the opening best-of-1. But I think in a best-of-3, based on what I saw MIBR do at Zotac and kind of seeing them more of a cohesive team, I think they should still make second seed in the best-of-3 decider if it comes to that, if they don't just straight up take care of business via best-of-1s. So that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please subscribe for more content. Catch you next time.